Hey friends and book lovers, welcome. Today I am doing the 5 favorites of the year so far. So I have looked at the books that I read up until the end of June, and I picked out 5 favorites plus a bonus that I really loved this year so far. This is not all inclusive, but these are the top ones that I would reread and maybe even recommend for you guys to read if you're interested in these. Some of them I would say, probably all of them are pretty popular, but they're just really good and I fell in love with them. So I wanted to do a video to talk about what I've loved so far, and then we can see at the end of the year if some of these still remain on my top favorites of the year as far as books go. So the first one I'm going to talk about is because I haven't finished the trilogy yet for this series, and I read the first one and I loved the first one. It was actually just so good and I was just in awe of the story and the storytelling. And that one's going to be The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. I am planning on finishing this trilogy this year. If you've read this, please comment down below if you loved it as much as I did, but I thought the first one was great. It was a really beautiful self-contained story. I know people have said that you can read this on its own or read the whole trilogy, and I have to agree when they say that you can read this on its own, because I read it on its own and I feel very satisfied with the story, with the ending and everything that happened. This is one of those, what if the Dark Ruler won and then we have a chosen one who gets up and helps fight the Dark Ruler, and there's a lot of political intrigue, there's a lot of spying, there's a lot of, I don't know, just masking and being someone who you're not, and like the poor playing the rich, and I loved all those tropes. They were so well done and so interesting. I really enjoy getting to know our character Vin, and one of my other favorite characters in this novel, Elend. I really enjoyed him as a character. He was like this fluffy cinnamon roll who was super smart, and I just can't get enough of reading about him and his banter and his like smarts and his just teasing. It was just such a good time. And I also loved other relationships in this book, and the magic system itself made a lot of sense and it was really fleshed out. So I really enjoyed that about this very much. And I think, of course, I think everyone's read this by now, but I wanted to include it because I personally really love this and I can't wait to get more into the world of Brandon Sanderson. So this was great. The next one I'll mention is one that I've mentioned a ton, and as I was reading it I knew it was probably going to be really good, and it even exceeded expectations of me thinking it was going to be really good. And I've mentioned this a bunch of times. I am finishing up this trilogy within the next couple of months, and I have done a review spoiler free for the first one, and that is The Ninth Reign. This is the Winnowing Flame trilogy, and the first book is The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams. It is really good. It's really hard to describe, but it has all these different factors from all these different books mashed up into one. There's some Throne of Glass that it reminds me of. It has like the mystery type thing that other books have, and it's a really good mashup of a lot of different things that you find in different books, but it's also masterfully done in this one. So it reminds me of a lot of different books, and it reminds me of the best part of a lot of different books. It is just spectacularly done. There's some sci-fi in this too somehow. I don't even understand how she wove sci-fi into it, but she did. It's so good. It's squarely a fantasy novel, but there's definitely a sci-fi element, and if you've read this you would definitely know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't read this, you're probably gonna find it really weird that I mentioned that, or you might even just be like, yeah, that makes sense, it's always sci-fi and fantasy. But for me, the way this happened was very strange because it's like modern sci-fi in a fantasy book. But either way, I'm looking forward to the second one. I think it's gonna be pretty friggin' epic, and I really enjoyed this. If you're into adult fantasy and you want something kind of different but kind of familiar, this is a good one to go with. I wish I could describe it better, but there's so much nuance in this book, so much detail. These I think would be a great books for a reread as well, so I can't wait to reread them in the future and then just pick up things that I probably didn't even pick up the first time. The next one is a contemporary, and I actually read this in the month of June for one of the prompts we had for Olympic Games readathon, and the audiobook was short, so I figured this was a great one to add. And it was a book written in verse by one very popular author, Elizabeth Acevedo, and this book is The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, and this was one of those books, it's contemporary verse poetry. It was one of those books that I was so happy that I picked it up on audiobook, because I think had I just read it just physically, it wouldn't have been as impactful. She is a wonderful narrator, and I think because she writes these books, I think from the heart, from the soul, from her experience, from the love of her culture. They just come out so authentically and so beautiful. I highly recommend reading the audiobook for this book. You could do an immersion read if you're into that. I have never immersion read, but if you wanted to, you could totally immersion read this. I just had such a great time reading this on audio, and literally in the first 20 minutes of reading this, I texted one of my friends and I said, you have to read this. She's not on BookTube, she's not on Bookstagram. She likes to read and she likes audiobooks and she has a commute. And I was like, you have to pick up this book. I think it's gonna impact you the way it impacted me. It's highly quotable, it's beautiful, and my gosh, just the way the author narrates this book, just the way she speaks about it, it just does something to you. It really moved me. I really related to it. I was emotional over it. It made me tear up. It made me just feel things. And yes, we all go through feelings with our characters in our books, but this made me feel like personal things, like things about myself. Made me reflect on the world, made me reflect on my experience, made me reflect on my relationships and my interactions, and it's just really good. So highly recommend this one, a favorite, and I think she is now one of my favorite authors as well. This next one might not come as a surprise to those of you who have been on my fantasy romance journey with me, and this book is no exception. I started this trilogy or this series after reading the Court of Thorns and Roses series, and everyone of course recommends the From Blood and Ash series, but my favorite book from that trilogy so far, it's a trilogy right now, but there's gonna be more books in the series, and my favorite book that I read this year from the series is definitely the second one. It's so good. It is A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I love this book. It's got everything that I wanted to have. It's like spicy, it's fun, it's just so good. I loved it. I think if you like fantasy romance, you can definitely check out this series. The third one in this series is not the best, but the first two are great, and I'm hoping for the series to turn around and be like really amazing in the rest of the spin-offs and the rest of the books in the series. So we'll see how the fourth book goes and how the other spin-off goes, but I think it'll be really good. I have high hopes anyways. The fifth book on this list is not a book at all. In fact, it's a whole trilogy that I think I just finished reading in June actually, and that is the City of Brass trilogy. I've done live shows on each of these books on Books with V's channel. I will link her down below, but honestly this is one of my favorites that I've read so far as an entire series. The second one wasn't my favorite. I think I give that a 4 or 4.5 stars just because there was a little bit slow pace for me at points versus the other books, but oh my gosh, this series, especially the last book in this series, Empire of Gold, chef's kiss. That book was amazing, and I just love the series as a whole, and I recommend it as a whole to anyone that's a fantasy lover. It is adult, it's not too smutty, there's got a romance, you know, it's got a romance, but it's not too smutty. It's just really well done. There's so much different mythology, Egyptian mythology, there's a lot of jinn mythology, there's like this mystical city in the desert, there's the crocodiles in the Nile, there's sea mythology with like the sea, everything. It's just so good. It is so good, and believe the hype around this, because I didn't believe the hype around this at first. I was just kind of like, I don't know if I'm gonna like it, but honestly, the hype for this is real. Sorry about that, my camera just died, so if things look a little bit different, that's why. But I wanted to mention another book, a sixth book. I mentioned my top 5 already, but I wanted to give this one an honorable mention. I'm not a middle grade channel, but I do read some middle grade on occasion, and one that I read in the first 6 months of the year that I really enjoyed was Amari and the Night Brothers. This is such a good middle grade fantasy story. It is so cute and so fun and so heartfelt. It talks about societal issues as well, things kids go through, especially kids of color, and it was just so good and well thought out. I really liked the characters in this book. I love the friendships, I love the resilience, I love the perseverance and the smarts, and the like self-love and self-worth that the character goes through, and her character arc is just so good. And I read this on audio, and the audiobook's really good. So if anyone wants to read middle grade and likes audiobooks, this is definitely one that's good on audio. Or if you have kids or whatever that want to read this is like a great like before bed kind of story, I think. Towards the end, it gets kind of action-packed, so maybe not that part before bed, but it's really good as an audiobook to have like in the car or whatever, because The narration is just so well done. It's a really fun story, and I am definitely going to continue on with reading this series once more books come out. It's just really worth it. I know this is the author's, I think, debut novel, and I think he did a fantastic job with this book. It is so good, and I think it speaks to many other booktubers that I've spoken to, which is why it intrigued me enough to want to give it a read, even though I don't read a lot of middle grade. And I have to say, they were right. This is another one that's just really worth the hype, and it's really good. So without including the bonus book, those were my top 5 reads / bonus series of the first half of the year. I'm definitely intrigued to see how this list is going to compare to my favorites of 2021 as a whole. I hope that I still see some of these on that list. I'm hoping to have some new favorites though by the time the year closes, but we will see. Hopefully you guys like this video. Let me know what your favorites have been for the first 6 months of this year or what they are currently. I would love to know. And if you like this video, please click that like button since it does really help my channel out a lot. And if you like this video and you want to see more content from me, please don't hesitate to subscribe.